Emma had mentioned earlier in the week that there was an important dinner with international partners scheduled for Friday night, and that her attendance was non-negotiable. She explained it was an excellent opportunity to make a good impression on upper management and potentially secure a promotion. I listened silently, nodding as she spoke. Emma had always been ambitious, and her dedication to her career was one of the things I respected about her. I had my own plans for the evening, spending a few hours in the garage working on the old motorcycle I had recently begun restoring. As Friday night approached, Emma spent quite a bit of time in front of the mirror, carefully selecting her outfit, adjusting her makeup, and trying different accessories. Her dress was elegant, subtle but sophisticated, the kind of outfit one would expect at a high-profile business dinner. Before leaving, she showed me the official invitation, as if to emphasize the formality of the event. I simply nodded and wished her luck. She left around 6 p.m., and I headed down to the garage, toolbox in hand, ready to lose myself in the hum of machinery and the scent of motor oil. Time passed quickly as I worked. The rhythmic sound of metal tools against engine components was oddly calming. Around 9, my phone vibrated with a notification. Emma had sent me a photo from the restaurant, a beautifully set table, gourmet dishes, and a glass of wine glowing under soft lighting. I smiled faintly and went back to work, pleased that she seemed to be enjoying herself. An hour later, I decided to check in and see how things were going. I sent a quick message, "How's everything going?" Her response came a few minutes later, everything was going smoothly, and the partners were much friendlier than she had expected. Her words felt sincere, and I had no reason to doubt them. I set my phone aside and continued working on the stubborn bolts in the motorcycle engine. Around 10, something prompted me to call her. I'm not sure if it was intuition or simple curiosity, but I dialed her number. Emma answered almost immediately. Her voice was steady, but there was something in the background, soft music and the distant hum of many voices blending together. She explained that the negotiations had been intense, and she had stepped away with a few colleagues to take a short break in the restroom. She assured me everything was fine, though her tone felt slightly off, not nervous, just restrained. As we spoke, I caught a brief flicker of movement in the background of her video call, the vague silhouette of a man passing by. It was too quick to draw any conclusions. After we hung up, I tried to shake off the odd feeling that lingered. I returned to the garage, but my focus was gone. The bolts and screws seemed more stubborn than before, and I found myself glancing at my phone every few minutes. Around 11, Emma sent me a short video. She was sitting at the table, laughing as an attentive waiter presented a tray of desserts with an elaborate display. Her expression was relaxed, and the scene seemed completely normal. The doubts that had started to surface began to fade. If something was wrong, she didn't look it. Shortly after midnight, Emma texted again. She explained that the dinner was running late because one of the clients was very enthusiastic and insisted on discussing every detail of the project over several glasses of wine. Her message had a tone of light humor mixed with mild exasperation and sounded like her usual way of expressing herself. She promised she wouldn't be too late. But by that time, I had already decided to wait up for her. It was nearly 2:30 in the morning when I heard the car pull into the driveway. I greeted her at the door. She looked tired but composed, standing tall and moving calmly. There was a slight wine stain on the hem of her dress, which she casually attributed to a clumsy colleague's mishap. Her hair was slightly tousled, but nothing unusual for someone who'd spent hours at a crowded table. As she walked past me, I caught a faint trace of an expensive men's cologne. It was subtle, barely noticeable, and I immediately assumed it could have easily come from one of the executives she'd been seated near. Emma must have noticed my slight hesitation because she sighed and offered an explanation. She described how the whole room had been filled with an overwhelming mix of colognes, perfumes, and the lingering smell of wine. The combination had been so intense that at one point she nearly felt nauseous. To support her story, she even showed me a group chat with her female colleagues where they had been exchanging messages about the strongest and most unpleasant scents they'd noticed during the evening. One message in particular joked about a certain cologne, calling it a biological weapon in a bottle. I nodded slowly as she spoke, her explanation aligned with her usual candidness. Emma recounted the evening briefly, mentioning that one of the senior clients had expressed interest in launching a collaborative project. Her voice was steady, her gaze direct. I nodded as she spoke, without interrupting or asking unnecessary questions. There was nothing in her demeanor that suggested guilt or deceit. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went straight to the kitchen for coffee. Emma was already there, speaking softly on the phone with her back to me. I caught only a fragment of the conversation. "It was nice talking to you last night." Her tone was casual, almost cheerful, but that one sentence lingered in my mind. When she noticed me, she hung up immediately and turned around to greet me with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "How's the motorcycle coming along?" I watched her for a moment before replying. Everything about her seemed perfectly normal, her movements were fluid, her smile genuine. There were no hesitations or awkwardness under my gaze. I answered naturally and drank my coffee, letting the moment pass without confrontation. The rest of the day went by without incident. Emma handled some household tasks and emails while I spent time in the garage. Still, my mind occasionally drifted back to the dinner, the phone call, the faint scent of cologne, and the brief silhouette on her screen. None of it amounted to solid evidence, though. Emma had always been honest, dependable, and dedicated to her work. The dinner made sense. The circumstances fit. There was no clear reason to doubt her, yet a faint unease lingered, a subtle shadow in the back of my mind that refused to fully fade. Earlier that week, Emma had mentioned she planned to go to a fitness session with a friend after work on Friday. She had recently purchased a membership at an upscale gym, and according to her, the workouts weren't just about staying in shape, they were a way to clear her mind and mentally reset. I didn't question it. Emma had always been disciplined when she committed to something new, and this didn't seem out of character. I had my own plans that evening, watching a football game with some friends at Mac's apartment. Before she left, Emma spent an unusually long time organizing her gym bag. She opened it, rearranged its contents, closed it, and then repeated the process several times. I noticed but said nothing. Just as she was about to head out the door, she stopped, tapped her forehead, and said she had forgotten her sneakers. She ran upstairs and came back down a few minutes later, waved goodbye, and left. As she walked away, I noticed her leggings were new, stylish and sleek, more suited for a photo shoot than an intense workout. I shrugged. Women often like to look good, even for routine activities. The game started, and I got into it, surrounded by laughter, bottles of beer, and the loud commentary on TV. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma, a photo from the gym locker room. The image showed a row of lockers, a bench, a plastic water bottle, and her faint reflection in the mirror. The accompanying text was brief, something about running on the treadmill and feeling exhausted. I replied with a simple okay and returned to the game. An hour later, during halftime, I felt the urge to reach out again. I called her, and she answered immediately. Her voice was steady but low, as if she was trying not to be overheard. In the background, I could hear faint voices, but no music or the usual sounds of a busy gym, no clanking weights or the whirring of treadmills. She explained that she was in the far end of the locker room where it was always quieter. She added that she had just finished her workout and was getting ready to shower. It made sense, but something about the atmosphere didn't quite match what I expected. Around midnight, Emma came through the front door. She was still wearing the same workout clothes she had left in, but they looked almost pristine, no visible sweat stains or signs of exertion. Her hair was neatly tied up, and her face looked fresh, without any trace of fatigue or redness. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and sat down at the table. I sat across from her. "How was the workout?" I asked casually. She smiled, took a sip of water, and began describing her evening. She talked about the treadmill, the workout routines, and how her friend had pushed her to keep going when she felt like quitting. Her words flowed smoothly, without hesitation. As she spoke, my eyes drifted to the gym bag by her feet. It looked unusually light for a bag that should have been full of sweaty clothes, towels, and toiletries. The zipper was slightly open, and I could see a portion of its contents: clean leggings, neatly folded, and a spare t-shirt. I frowned slightly. "Your bag seems pretty light," I said, trying to sound offhand. Emma didn't miss a beat. "I forgot my towel in the drying room at the gym," she said confidently. "That's probably why it feels lighter." Her explanation was quick and precise, but it felt rehearsed, as if she had anticipated the question. Before I could respond, she took out her phone and showed me a short video. She appeared sitting on a bench in what was clearly a gym locker room, laughing, slightly disheveled, and sipping water. Behind her, rows of lockers and gym bags were visible. The person recording, presumably Sarah, spoke in the background, joking about how exhausted Emma looked. The video was convincing. If it had been staged, it was very well done. I nodded and leaned back in my chair, but Emma didn't stop there. She called Sarah in front of me, put the call on speaker, and waited. Sarah answered almost immediately, sounding upbeat and relaxed. "Hey, Sarah," Emma said. "Alex was just asking about our workout tonight." "Oh yeah," Sarah replied enthusiastically. Emma was on fire today. We were both totally wiped out by the end. I don't even know how we managed to finish the last set. The conversation was brief, casual, and didn't sound forced. After hanging up, Emma placed the phone on the table and looked at me with a faint smile. "See? Just a regular night at the gym," she said lightly. That I nodded again and leaned back farther in my chair. Her story made sense, nothing was out of place. Still, something didn't sit right. It wasn't her words or her actions, but a faint feeling, like an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. That I stood up, stretched, and let out a sigh. "All right," I said, trying to keep the tone relaxed. "Let's leave it at that. But Emma, you've been acting a little strange lately." She tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Are you saying something's wrong?" "If there's ever something I need to know," I said quietly, "I'll find out. You understand that, right?" Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on mine. "I understand," she said softly. "Don't worry, everything's fine." Her words were calm, her composure steady. But as I walked back to the living room, that subtle unease lingered, a quiet presence that refused to go away. The next morning, Emma mentioned she had an important client meeting at the office that evening. She explained that the discussions might run late, so I shouldn't wait for her for dinner. I nodded distractedly, my eyes still fixed on the spreadsheet open on my laptop. I was focused on my own projects and didn't think much about her plans. Emma had always been professional, and it wasn't unusual for her to have late meetings. As evening fell, around 7 p.m., Emma sent me a photo of the conference room. The image showed a long, polished table, a glass of water, an open laptop, and rows of empty chairs. Her message was brief: "The client is running late, but I'm already here. We'll start any minute." It seemed normal, part of the routine. I replied with a simple okay and went back to work. Hours passed, and the silence in the apartment grew heavier as the night wore on. Around 10, I leaned back in my chair and decided to call her. She answered almost immediately, speaking softly and slowly. In the background, I could hear faint voices, but not the distinct sounds of a busy office in the middle of a negotiation. No overlapping conversations, no clinking glasses, no rustling of papers. Emma explained that she was sitting in a quiet corner of the conference room, speaking in a low voice while the client finished reviewing some points. She sounded calm, almost too calm, but I didn't push it. I simply said, "Understood," and hung up. Just before midnight, Emma texted again, "We finally finished. I'm on my way home." An hour later, the sound of her keys in the lock broke the stillness of the night. She walked in with confident steps, dropped her bag near the door, and headed straight to the kitchen. I was already there, sipping a cup of tea. She looked composed. Her hair was perfectly in place, her makeup untouched, her white blouse pristine and barely wrinkled. The only irregularity was a small stain on the cuff of her blazer, so faint it was almost unnoticeable. "How did it go?" I asked, staring into my cup. Emma gave a detailed summary of the evening, describing how the client had been unusually meticulous with the contract terms and how the discussions had gone on until nearly everyone had left the office. Her tone was smooth, her words precise, without hesitation. As she spoke, my eyes drifted to her bag by the door. It looked oddly light for one supposedly carrying documents and maybe a laptop. "Your bag seems pretty light," I commented, trying to sound casual. Emma responded almost instantly. "I left the documents at the office," she said. "It was late, and I didn't feel like carrying everything home. I'll grab them tomorrow." Her explanation was firm and confident, but something in the way she said it felt rehearsed. She opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and drank with smooth, deliberate movements that I decided not to press further. She had given her answers, and pushing the issue would only lead to pointless arguments. I finished my tea, stood up, and went to the bedroom. The next morning, as I searched for my jacket in the shared wardrobe, something caught my eye. Tucked into the pocket of one of Emma's blazers, crumpled in a corner, was a receipt. Without thinking, I pulled it out and unfolded it. It showed 2 coffees and a croissant, breakfast. I calmly placed the receipt on the table and looked at it, 2 coffees and a croissant, during a supposed late-night negotiation. I asked without raising my voice, 2 coffees and a croissant. During the meeting. Emma looked at the receipt, then at me. Her expression didn't change. "The client was running late," she said. I grabbed a quick bite with a colleague while we waited. It was freezing in the conference room, and we had plenty of time. Her explanation was fluid, her voice controlled. She looked me straight in the eye, unblinking. That I leaned back slightly, studying her face for any flicker of doubt or hesitation, but found none. I nodded slowly and returned to my cup of coffee. "And your makeup," I added after a short pause. It looked freshly applied, not like someone who just sat through hours of tense meetings. Emma gave a faint smile and shook her head. "Good makeup, Alex. It's not that complicated. Besides, are we really doing this? This feels like a police interrogation." Her attempt at humor didn't quite land. The smile was there, but it felt calculated. I said nothing more, finished my coffee, placed the cup in the sink, and left the kitchen. Later that day, the conversation still lingered in my mind. I decided to call an old acquaintance who worked in the same field. We chatted casually about work, and eventually, I mentioned the client Emma had told me about. "Oh yeah, that meeting," he said naturally. "I heard the negotiations went on until really late. Must have been exhausting." His words reassured me. The timeline matched, the details aligned. If there had been any discrepancies in Emma's story, nothing seemed to have surfaced in professional circles. I hung up and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. There would always be small inconsistencies, strange coincidences, tiny cracks in the narrative that could be explained in a number of ways. For now, the pieces seemed to fit. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling and murmuring, "All right. Maybe everything really is fine." Emma had mentioned the day before that she'd be staying home over the weekend to work on an urgent project from her boss. She explained that it was easier to concentrate at home than at the office, where constant interruptions made it hard to focus. I didn't question it, it made sense. Emma had always been diligent with her work. On Saturday morning, I went fishing with my dad. We loaded the truck with our gear, the weather looked promising, and the trip was peaceful. On the second day, the sky turned gray, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. My father suggested heading back earlier than planned. The fish had been biting, but it wasn't worth risking a storm. I agreed, and by mid-afternoon, we were already home. My dad stayed downstairs to clean and organize the equipment while I went up to our apartment. As I opened the door, I heard the faint tapping of a knife on a cutting board. Emma was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She startled slightly at the sound of the door but quickly turned and smiled. "Oh, you're back early. How was the fishing?" she asked in a light, casual tone. "Good," I replied, taking off my jacket and giving a quick glance around. The kitchen table caught my attention, 2 plates with leftover food, 2 wine glasses with faint rings at the bottom, and 2 empty coffee mugs. Everything suggested she'd had company recently. "Did you have someone over?" I asked, nodding toward the table. "Yes, Kate stopped by to help me with some spreadsheets." "We had lunch together," Emma replied naturally. Her explanation was smooth and consistent. Kate was one of her closest friends and often helped her with work-related tasks. I nodded and headed to the bedroom to change out of my damp fishing clothes. As I passed through the living room, something colorful on the rug caught my eye, a crumpled yellow sock near the edge of the couch. It wasn't mine, and it definitely wasn't Emma's. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and slipped it into my pocket without saying anything. In the bathroom, a damp towel hung on the rack, wrinkled, not folded the way Emma usually did. It struck me as odd, but maybe she'd used it after washing her hands or something similar. When I returned to the kitchen, Emma was still focused on chopping vegetables. I placed the yellow sock on the counter. "And this?" I asked casually. Emma glanced at it, furrowed her brow for a second, then seemed to recall something. "Oh, that's Kate's," she said with ease. She came straight from her yoga class and probably left it behind when she changed clothes. She was in a bit of a rush. Her response was quick and confident. I thought about it for a moment and shrugged. It was plausible. Kate could be absent-minded and often left things behind. The evening continued without tension. Emma cooked, I helped set the table, and over dinner, she told me that her boss had called to congratulate her on her dedication. There was a good chance she'd be considered for a promotion if she completed everything on time. Her voice sounded optimistic, her mood calm. Later, while Emma cleaned up in the kitchen, I heard her speaking on the phone. She sounded cheerful and relaxed. I caught a few phrases: "Kate, thanks again for helping me," and "that wine you brought was perfect." It sounded like a normal conversation between friends. After dinner, we each went back to our routines. Emma returned to her laptop to finalize her project, and I watched some TV. Everything felt normal, routine. At one point, I got up to clear the dishes and saw the yellow sock still sitting on the entry table. I picked it up and neatly placed it on the edge, assuming Kate would stop by soon to pick it up. The next morning, just as I was finishing breakfast, the doorbell rang. It was Kate. She greeted me with her usual energy and immediately spotted the sock. "Oh my God, there it is," she said, laughing as she picked it up. "I knew I'd left it somewhere. I swear I'm the most forgetful person on the planet." I laughed too and nodded as she walked down the hallway. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, coffee cup in hand. "Told you it was Kate's," she said with a playful smile. "You were right," I replied simply. The day went on normally. Emma returned to her project, and I spent some time in the garage. The events of the previous night, the sock, the towel, the conversation, all seemed to form a perfectly logical narrative. There were no lingering doubts, no loose ends. Then came the next Friday night, and things took a turn. Emma came home late, slightly unsteady from the alcohol, her cheeks flushed. She took off her heels at the door, holding a bottle of expensive champagne in one hand and her purse in the other. She was beaming with joy, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Guess what?" she said, leaning against the doorway. I looked up from the TV, a little surprised. "What happened?" "I got promoted, again," she exclaimed, raising her arms in triumph. "We celebrated at the office, but now I'm home, and we're celebrating together." I stood up and walked over to congratulate her with a hug. Emma had always been ambitious and dedicated, so another promotion wasn't entirely unexpected. But something about her behavior caught my attention. Her excitement felt almost over the top, her energy slightly overwhelming. Still, I pushed those feelings aside and toasted with her. The following week passed without incident. Emma remained focused on her new responsibilities, working late and sometimes leaving early in the morning for meetings. I wasn't too concerned. Success often demands sacrifices, and she had always been willing to make them, but everything changed one Thursday night when my phone rang. It was one of Emma's co-workers, a guy I'd met once at an office Christmas party. He'd always seemed nervous, overly formal, and the kind of person who sweated even in air conditioning. That I answered, curious why he was calling me. "Alex, we need to talk. It's about Emma. It's important." His voice was serious, almost urgent. "You can't tell me over the phone?" I asked, glancing at the time. "No. This isn't something I can explain like that. Meet me at OM Mao's bar in an hour, please." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I told Emma I needed to go out to return a tool to my father. She barely acknowledged me, completely absorbed in her laptop and surrounded by papers. At the bar, her coworker was already waiting, drumming his fingers on a glass of soda. I sat down across from him. "What is this about?" I asked directly. That he looked around to make sure no one was listening and then leaned toward me. "Do you know what your wife is doing with her boss?" I remained still, my expression neutral. "Enlighten me." "Emma's been promoted 3 times, Alex. 3, within a year. Does that seem normal to you? In our office, people wait years for a single promotion. And she's rising like she's on an escalator." I didn't respond. Then he pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and showed me something that made my stomach tighten. That it was Emma in her boss's office, in a compromising position that left little room for doubt. That I watched it without changing expression. When the video ended, he tucked the phone away and leaned back in his chair. "That's how she gets those promotions," he said bitterly. "While the rest of us work ourselves to death for scraps." I sat there in silence, processing what I had just seen. That he continued, "There's a way to fix this. If you want real revenge, we can trap her, expose her publicly, humiliate her, and get her fired. You just have to play along and not let her suspect anything." The plan was simple but effective: plant evidence, subtly sabotage things, and reveal her relationship with her boss at the worst possible moment. She would be left with nothing. That I considered it coldly. It was cruel, calculated, and effective. I nodded. "All right. Let's do it." I left the bar without saying another word. I got in my car and drove home. Emma was already asleep when I arrived, curled up on her side of the bed. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, the woman I thought I knew so well. Carefully, I walked over to her nightstand and picked up her phone. It was locked, but I knew the passcode. She had always been predictable in that sense. I navigated through her apps until I found one I didn't recognize, an encrypted messaging platform. Inside was a hidden chat. What I read confirmed everything. Emma and her boss had planned everything meticulously: the supposed client dinner, the gym setup, even the conveniently forgotten sock. It had all been orchestrated. They openly mocked me, congratulating each other on how easily I bought into their lies. That first fake dinner. Perfect. He didn't even hesitate, one message read. "The gym stunt was risky, but Sarah nailed it," said another. "The sock almost blew it, but the quick recovery saved us," another message added. Message after message, their arrogance was palpable. They believed they were untouchable, certain I'd never suspect a thing. That I took screenshots of everything, every message, every detail, every bit of evidence, and transferred them to my own phone. Then I returned Emma's phone exactly where it had been. I left the bedroom and sat down on the sofa in the dark, my phone vibrating as the files finished transferring. There was nothing left to do, except wait. Emma had spun her own web, and soon she would be caught in it. Revenge didn't need to be rushed. It would unfold naturally, step by step. I just had to let it happen. It began almost imperceptibly. Cracks appeared in Emma's professional image like fine fractures, but they spread quickly. The first incident involved the disappearance of critical company files just days before an important presentation. Emma was the one responsible for overseeing the project. And although she claimed to have no idea what had happened, the damage was done. Her team managed to recover the files, but it was too late. The client had already learned of the delay, and trust had been broken. Whispers started echoing in the office, casual remarks about incompetence, carelessness, even hints of sabotage. Then came the financial reports. The budget for a high-profile corporate event started drawing scrutiny. The numbers didn't add up, and discrepancies appeared in the expense sheets. Emma's name was all over them, along with her signature. Meetings were called. Questions were raised. The insinuations became bolder. Some colleagues raised eyebrows, suggesting that maybe the errors weren't accidental. Emma defended herself, presenting emails and spreadsheets, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. A few days later, an anonymous email arrived in Human Resources. It contained doctored screenshots, manipulated messages, and misleading photos, all taken out of context but crafted to place Emma in a highly compromising position, implying unethical behavior. HR launched an internal investigation. Emma was called in for questioning multiple times, each session chipping away at her confidence. The stress became unbearable. Colleagues who once greeted her with smiles now barely nodded. The office chatter spread like wildfire, and Emma found herself increasingly isolated. Every look felt like judgment. Every conversation turned hollow and forced. Then came the sabotage of a crucial project. Emails with key data were sent, but the information was intentionally incorrect. Deadlines were missed, resources wasted, and the final result was a disaster. As project leader, Emma took most of the blame. Management was furious. Meetings turned into interrogations, and her explanations fell on deaf ears. Even her own team began to distance themselves, stepping away from the fallout. The whispers grew louder. Emma was labeled careless, unreliable, and ultimately unfit for her role. The pressure became suffocating, and each time she tried to defend herself, more evidence, planted and manipulated, seemed to surface. The final blow came in the form of a forged email thread. Someone had created an account under Emma's name and exchanged a series of compromising messages with her boss, so inappropriate that they were impossible to explain away. During a company-wide meeting, the thread was displayed on a large screen, leaving Emma exposed in front of everyone. Her face turned pale as she realized the trap had closed. After the meeting, she was summoned to the executive office. The conversation was brief. She was handed her resignation as the only acceptable option, though, in reality, there was no choice. She left the building with a cardboard box carrying her belongings. Her heels echoed hollowly on the marble floor. That night, she came home. I was in the living room, phone in hand, when I heard the door. She walked in, clutching the box as if it were a lifeline, her eyes red, her makeup smeared at the corners. She placed the box near the door and slowly walked toward me. "It's over," she said in a trembling voice. "They fired me." I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral. "Why? What happened?" "They think I did everything on purpose," she whispered, collapsing onto the couch beside me. "The files, the finances, the emails. They believe I sabotaged it all. But I swear to you, Alex, it's like a nightmare. Everything happened so fast, like dominoes falling." Her hands trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She covered her face and let out a stifled sob. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, giving it a soft squeeze. "Everything will work out," I said quietly. "You'll figure it out." She looked at me, searching for a flicker of comfort. "Do you believe me?" I held her gaze and gave a slight nod. "Of course." But inside, behind the mask of sympathy, I felt something else, cold satisfaction, a dark calm. Justice had come. Her career had been built on deceit, abusing a system she thought she could control. In the end, her house of cards collapsed, leaving only chaos behind. Emma continued talking, her words disjointed, blaming office politics, co-workers' jealousy, bad luck. Never once did she reflect on her own actions or accept responsibility. Later that night, she went to bed early, emotionally drained. I stayed in the living room, the TV on mute, its flickering light casting sharp shadows on the walls. I mentally reviewed every step, the fake emails, the missing files, the planted evidence, all executed with precision. Revenge had been served, she had built her success through manipulation, and I had facilitated her fall. It wasn't an accident or fate, it was a calculated strategy, perfectly executed. By the end of the night, I turned off the lights and walked to the bedroom. Emma was already asleep, breathing with apparent calm. I stood for a moment, watching her before getting into bed. This wasn't over. Not yet. But the stage was set for the final act. I had made my decision. Divorce was no longer a distant idea, it was a carefully crafted plan. Emma had no suspicion, and I intended to keep it that way. Every step was calculated, every decision measured. I wouldn't hesitate again. For weeks, I prepared everything in silence. When I said I was meeting a friend, running errands, or staying late at work, I was actually meeting with my lawyer, a stern, meticulous professional specializing in clean, efficient separations. Together, we drafted the necessary documents, discussed asset division, and developed a strategy to avoid legal obstacles. I began gathering evidence, screenshots, emails, messages, each piece of the puzzle that told the full story of Emma's betrayal. I stored it all securely, well organized and ready if needed. There was no room for emotion or doubt. I had learned the hard way, hesitation only created vulnerability. Emma was clever, manipulative even. If she sensed anything, she'd try to control the situation. I couldn't allow that. Gradually, I distanced myself from her emotionally. Our conversations grew shorter, our interactions colder, almost transactional. I stopped analyzing her words and behavior. None of it mattered anymore. My goal was clear: leave that relationship cleanly, without chaos. I didn't want explanations or apologies, just a final, quiet end. I stayed up late reviewing divorce documents, checking the fine print, making sure everything was airtight, our apartment, joint savings, even minor subscriptions. I planned how to move out without raising suspicion: one suitcase today, a box next week. Carefully and quietly, the final night came when Emma planned to go out with a friend. She had been complaining for days about stress after the firing, and I encouraged her to spend the evening away, to relax. As soon as I heard the door close, I went to work. Methodically, I packed the essentials: passport, bank statements, insurance documents, my computer, hard drives, and anything else of personal value. I moved with care, aware of every small noise in the apartment's silence. Before leaving, I left a short, direct letter on the kitchen table, along with a thick envelope containing the signed divorce papers. The letter read, "I knew everything. Every excuse, every look, every story you made up. You thought you were careful, but you underestimated me. The divorce is already filed. Nothing you say or do can change that. I won't be here to hear explanations or apologies. Live your life however you want. Just know this: I was behind your fall. Goodbye, Alex." With that, I left the apartment and closed the door behind me. For the last time. Days later, I ran into a neighbor, a middle-aged man who always seemed to know everything about everyone. He leaned on the railing and spoke softly. "You know, Alex, the night she came back and found your letter, she collapsed right there in the doorway. I could hear her crying through the door. She stayed there for hours, motionless." I nodded without expression. I didn't feel pity or satisfaction. It was done. The legal process was quick. My lawyer ensured everything went according to plan. Emma had little defense, especially with the evidence I had gathered. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes or endless battles. Everything was resolved through forms and signatures. When it was over, the chapter was closed. Emma tried contacting me several times in the following weeks: calls, texts, emails. At first, they were curious. Then more apologetic, filled with explanations and pleas. I didn't read most of them. I wasn't interested in reopening that door. Months passed, and my life began to clear. I moved into a new apartment, larger, brighter, free from the ghosts of the past. I focused on my work, channeling energy into building something solid. On weekends, I returned to working on my motorcycle, finding comfort in the roar of the engine and the feel of tools in my hands. I met new people, no rush to get involved in anything serious. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. Emma, on the other hand, struggled to move forward. Rumors of her dismissal spread in the industry, making it difficult for her to find new opportunities. Her charm and wit could no longer cover the internal fractures. Her professional image crumbled as quickly as it had risen. Now and then, I'd receive another message from her, long paragraphs of regret, apologies, and pleas for forgiveness. But my resolve remained unshaken. I had made peace with my choices. There was no going back. Sometimes I wondered if Emma truly understood the magnitude of it all, if she realized how every choice she made led her to that outcome. But those were fleeting thoughts. I didn't dwell on them. That I had built a new life, brick by brick, strong and steady. Emma had become a chapter one had finished reading. A warning, maybe, but nothing more. And no matter how many messages she sent, or how many times she called, I never answered. Silence was my final word. And it echoed louder than any explanation. Story 2. I grew to like her. The good thing was we were both single, and I was open to taking a chance with her. Right from my early teens, I had always loved intelligent girls who would blow me off my feet with their super brains, and I believed my prayers were answered when I met my ex-wife. But I was wrong. We were friends for 7 months before I asked her out. I didn't want to wait any longer before someone else would take her away from me. From the first month of our relationship, I felt we were made for each other. Months after we started dating, the level at which she influenced me grew too, and many things changed in my life. We were the perfect couple, and every day I thanked God for meeting her. As of the time we met, I was earning little, but I tried my best to gift her occasionally, even though they weren't expensive. I got her most of those books on business advertising and even one popular marketing book. The ads were everywhere. After about 2 years of dating, she got her lucky break. She was contacted to be a business consultant for a top company in our country, which turned things around for us. I worked as a marketer and tried my best to close big deals. Within the first 2 years of dating my ex-wife, I closed deals I could not close in 4 years. And although it wasn't a lot of money, it was a stepping stone for me. Shortly after that, things started to fall into place for us. I improved with marketing, persuading clients, and closing deals. She grew too. We married after dating for 3 years, and our lives continued improving. Before we remarried, we agreed not to have children until we reached a specific financial goal, and we didn't change the plan. We were driven by early success, and I believed that the same way famous, successful men and women had done it, we could do it too. For the first 3 years of our marriage, we put in a ton of effort, had sleepless nights, brainstormed together, started a business, and even sacrificed many things to achieve our dreams. The only luxury we had was the food we ate and the apartment we lived in. We owned a 2005 model car and invested every penny we made from our jobs in the business we were trying to grow. Luckily, we had the most significant break in the 4th year of our marriage. Sales skyrocketed, and even top organizations knew about us. In our 4th year of marriage, we decided to go on a vacation, the first after our small honeymoon. I was so excited about it and happy because my dreams had become a reality. We were able to move into a bigger and more comfortable apartment, and our business was doing well. We increased the number of our remote staff, and everything could be handled even in our absence. The money was rolling in steadily, and I was glad my ex-wife and I could finally live the life we had been dreaming of. I envisioned our vacation to be mind-blowing, full of intimacy and rekindling our love, but it opened my eyes to a very painful truth that I can't get over to date. While we were on vacation, my ex-wife was still connecting to her yoga classes online. It was just a part of her I had to deal with. She was committed and never missed a day, whether sick or not. On the third day of our vacation, after we had gone out that morning, we returned to the apartment and rested that afternoon. She said she was going for a walk and asked if I'd join her, but since I was still sleepy, I told her I would stay back and rest. Unfortunately, after she left, I couldn't sleep anymore and couldn't contact her because she didn't go out with her phone. I became bored and decided to play a game on her tablet. I didn't use my phone because I would wander off and spend the whole afternoon working or conversing with my staff. As soon as I started playing the game, a notification popped up, and it was from her yoga instructor. The last message he sent her read, "I love you," and had love emojis at the end, which I thought was odd. At first, I thought her yoga instructor was only being nice to her, but a part of me wanted to learn more, so I clicked on the message, and it opened up their main WhatsApp chat. When I saw what was there, it made my heart bleed. I found messages that dated back a year, and there were all forms of voice notes between them. They also exchanged their nudes, said dirty things to each other, and would occasionally make jokes about other members of their yoga class. I could not believe that my ex-wife was cheating on me with her yoga instructor, and she hid it effortlessly because we were also so busy on our phones. I never suspected anything fishy was going on. I'd even found out that they were always meeting at different hotels to get intimate, and each time they were together, they made videos of them in bed or in the bathroom together. On that day, I realized that my ex-wife was not obsessed with yoga, but she was obsessed with her yoga instructor. She repeatedly told him she worshipped the ground he walked on and said things to him that she had never told me. According to her messages, he was her spiritual guide and opened her eyes to the real truth. Reading all those weird things and seeing pictures and videos of them together destroyed a part of me. Even if I had been told by a psychic that my wife was cheating or would cheat on me, I would not have believed it. I trusted her with everything, and I wanted more than anything to spend the rest of my life with her. When I had seen enough, I forwarded all the messages, pictures, and videos to my phone and cleared every trace that I had touched her phone. I returned to bed before she returned, but she could tell I was sad about something. She pressed to know what it was, and I lied to her that I had lost a mega deal and felt terrible about it. I pretended to be sick 2 days later, and our vacation was cut short. When we returned, I knew she wouldn't miss her yoga class the next day, and she didn't. An hour after she left that morning, I surprised her at her class and asked if I could play something on their general screen in her presence, and her yoga instructor agreed immediately. The first video started playing, everyone gasped in surprise and turned to her and their yoga instructor. I watched my ex-wife stand there in confusion with tears in her eyes. She had tried to walk closer to me but ended up running out of the hall in embarrassment. Her yoga instructor tried to hide his shame, but I played the recording too, and everyone saw their messages. It was such a big mess. When I got home, I realized that she had moved some of her things out of our room and she left a small note which read, "I'm sorry," and that was the end of the road for us. We ended up divorcing and splitting every penny we made from the business. As for her yoga instructor, he was fired, and neither he nor my ex-wife dared show their faces at the facility again. I knew I could survive without her, but despite everything we had achieved together, I still hate her for doing. She couldn't even face me to apologize or something, she just dropped a note. We haven't spoken to each other since then, and it's been 2 years now, and I've still been struggling to move on. This story reflects deep disappointment and pain caused by the betrayal of a spouse. The protagonist invested a lot in the relationship and dreamed of a shared future, but his trust was shattered. The protagonist's reaction to the betrayal is understandable given the context of his deep wound, but revenge rarely leads to true healing. It is important to learn lessons from such situations and strive for honesty, openness, and communication in relationships.